welcome everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today for this, the Impact Investing Institute's third webinar. I'm Sarah Gordon, I'm Chief Executive of the Institute, and I'd like to warmly welcome our two panellists today, Amanda Young and Richard Curtis. Amanda is the Global Head of Responsible Investment at Aberdeen Standard Investments, and she's really been a pioneer of integrating environmental, social and governance issues into the mainstream investment process. And Richard has had many different roles in his life. He's written and directed major movies, co-founded Comic Relief and Make Poverty History, is a UN advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals, and is now spearheading the consumer campaign Make My Money Matter. So we're very pleased to have these two very experienced and knowledgeable panelists to talk to us today about the concept of building back better after coronavirus. It's a phrase that a lot of people are using. We're really going to try to drill down and see what it actually means. And obviously this crisis has had an enormous human and economic cost, but amid the suffering, it does provide some opportunities. And we at the Impact Investing Institute believe, like many others, that building back more resilient health systems, more resilient financial systems, and economies that really genuinely support our societies in the long term will be absolutely crucial to making a crisis like this less likely in the future. And we believe that companies and investors which are at the forefront of addressing the most pressing social and environmental challenges, whether it's inequality or climate change, will really help us make us much more able to withstand these kinds of shocks. So with Amanda and Richard, we're going to explore how investors, how savers and asset managers can really play an active role in building back better after the crisis. We're going to hear from our panelists for about 30 minutes or so before we move on to answering your questions. We're very much looking forward to those. Please do type your questions directly into the Q&A feature, which you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom window. And even if you don't have questions of your own, do feel free to have a look at the Q&A box, because you can upvote other people's questions, which makes it easier for us to see which questions are the most interesting to you in the audience. We'd also very much like to stay engaged with you after the webinar, so we'll be sending you a follow-up email, which will take the opportunity to answer questions that we may not have time to respond to during the event. We'll also send you a link to a recording of the event and resources that are mentioned during the conversation. And you might see some of those popping up in the chat while the webinar is going on. So Richard, if I can turn to you first, I took on my job running the Impact Investing Institute in September, and I have to say that before that I mainly knew your name as the writer and director of several of my very favourite films like Love Actually. But as I mentioned,
I can't apologise enough, by the way. Can't apologise.
Definitely no apologies necessary.
Well, you obviously haven't seen Bridget Jones 2, but
we'll
pass that. We'll pass that by quickly.
And obviously, as I mentioned in my introduction, you've also, you've done this amazing, you've had this amazing journey into sort of real activism on co-founding Comic Relief, Make Poverty History, being an advocate for the SDGs, and now spearheading Make My Money Matter. Can you talk to us a bit about what took you from filmmaking to activism?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at the sort of pensions interest in the Make My Money, I do see a kind of journey. So I started Comic Relief after going to Ethiopia in 1985. So with that same sort of sense of trauma about the famine there, and then lots of issues in the UK, we particularly focused on homelessness at the beginning. And I think at that time, it seemed to me the obvious thing to do was to raise money, and give it to charities and to NGOs. So that was my sort of first bit. I still believe in that strongly. Then when it came to 2005, and we were going to do Live 8 again and Make My Money Matter, the absolute clarity that the money that governments have should be, as well spent as it possibly can. I remember Bob Geldof saying he made more money over a cup of tea with President Mitterrand than he did in the whole of Band Aid and Live Aid, because he just sort of tweaked up the aid budget, and that was billions instead of millions. And now suddenly, so I've sort of done the charity and done the politics, and now everyone I talk to, and particularly my family, people are focusing on the question of sort of action, what we can actually do in our own lives. And, so I see it everywhere. I see it with people, thinking about the clothes they wear and how they're produced, and about the food that they buy, and about whether they should fly or not fly. So I feel as though people want to integrate their beliefs actually into the way that they behave. And as I was thinking about this, the sort of clarity of the fact that we're sitting as normal individuals on a huge pot of money, and we don't know what it's investing in and what it's doing in the world. And so this idea of, as it were, you watch your carbon footprint, but you also watch your financial footprint. And it suddenly sort of became clear to me, which people have been saying, this is one of the big ways of moving the billions into trillions. You can't stretch aid and social care and everything like that forever. But what happens if business was increasingly committed to doing all the things that we want to happen in our own lives? So this is just a part of that feeling that if you could do something about where your investments are and where your pension is and how your bank behaves, that is probably the most powerful thing that you can do to change the world. There's some lovely Finnish statistic that says that changing your money into a sustainable pension is 27 times more effective than all the things that, as it were, you can do around your house and in how you travel and everything. So I think it's a movement towards people wanting in their own lives to genuinely be doing the best they can.
And I mean, at the moment during this crisis, I mean, for a number, for many people, managing their pensions is not top of their priority list. We've got people grappling with such immediate challenges. But why, especially now during this crisis, do you think that people really should be thinking about the power of their pensions, and why, and really understanding better how their pensions work?
Well, I mean, I do think that we've all had time to think about the huge questions. I mean, one of the terrible things about COVID is it can show you that terrible things happen. So as when you're talking about climate, we've all vaguely thought theoretically that New York might flood one day, but we never quite believed it. And that suddenly you see a huge pandemic spreading across the world. So I think that there is a new urgency to address these huge issues of justice and poverty and climate, because they really can come at you. So I think that there's a more urgent need about it. And then you also have seen how the systems themselves aren't working. So I often think, you think about investment, can you invest in better and more affordable healthcare? Can you, invest in better housing? Can you invest in renewable energy? So suddenly all these things which could solve future crises and will build a more sustainable, suddenly the power is in our hands. And you say that no one's thinking about their pensions, and that is very true probably, but then most of the time most of us don't think about it. When I got interested in this, I didn't know where my pensions were. In fact, most people don't even know that their pensions are invested. Most people don't know that their bank invests their money while it's sitting there. So there is a huge job of public education. And I think if ever there's a moment to say to people, you're asking, what can I do to help in crises, but also help the planet and people generally, seems to me a very good moment for it, even though for some people, of course, it will be unthinkable because they're so worried about their jobs and their pensions and all those kind of things. That doesn't stop the general importance of it.
Yeah. I mean, Amanda, that sort of, that gap between people's knowledge and moving towards impact investment is something that you've been doing that for the many years, getting people in the asset management industry to really embrace the impact investing agenda. And how did that start for you, and what were the sort of big hurdles that you faced on the way?
Thank you so much, Sarah, for having us here today. Yeah, I've been in this industry for 20 years, which seems an awfully long time. And I sort of stumbled across it by chance, if you like. When I left university, I came into financial services because it's a good place to have a job. And then when I realized that actually I could bring my values to my job in responsible investment, it was like a dream made true for me, because I do have a very strong view that companies and the investments we make can be a positive force for the world. And it's not just about evil oil companies spilling oil or mining companies harming communities. There is a massive amount of economic and social good that companies can bring. So 20 years ago, my first job in this space was actually doing ethical investment on behalf of the Church of England. And believe it or not, it was more challenging then than it is now, where fund managers just wanted a list of thou shalt not invest in stocks. So what were the social and environmental challenges for the church, and where should they avoid investment? And that came out of apartheid South Africa and some pressure that was put on the church at the time. But over the time I was working for the church, there was a growing recognition that as investors, you have a voice. You have a voice with the companies that you invest in. So being able to use that voice to challenge companies, to get them to improve, and actually on behalf of an institution like the Church of England, your voice is quite powerful. And it just made me realize how you could be an advocate as an investor. Now, the thing that's really dawned on me is that in the 1600s, that was the first investment that was ever made. And there was no power as an investor to do something social, because investments were made by a handful of very wealthy individuals. So all the companies that we owned were owned by a few wealthy individuals who were in it for the money. That was all they were interested in. And from the 1970s onwards, as pensions started growing, that shift of power has moved substantially in the last 40, 50 years. So we've moved from a few wealthy individuals owning all the companies in the world to effectively you and me and the person on the street having that voice, having that power. We are investors in these companies through our pension funds. And with that, as a realization has grown that you have a power, a voice as an individual through your pension funds to do something really powerful. And for me, that's a really, really exciting thing. So to be able to give power back to the end investors, I think is where we could generate some real positive environmental and social good, as well as help the underlying investors retire in 30 years' time when they want their pensions.
Yes, I mean, it's partly a question of what kind of world we all want to retire into, isn't it? I mean, we know from discussions that we've had at the Impact Investing Institute with pension scheme trustees and other institutional investors that there's still a lot of concern around impact investing and whether that's compatible with, for example, pension scheme trustees' fiduciary duty. There is perceived uncertainty about financial return. How do you address those concerns, and do you think we need to have a different understanding of risk?
Yes, I think there's two bits here. There's a risk and opportunity piece. So if we think about impact, every investment we make has an impact, whether it's positive or negative. When we're talking about impact investing, we're talking about intentionality. So an intention for that underlying investment to have a social and positive outcome at the heart and the core of what they do. That's pure impact investing. But there is this range, and the impact investing principles that IMP have put together, Impact Management Project have put together, really articulate this well. So you can have a range of impact, from avoiding harm, so making sure that the investments you are making, without thinking about excluding large chunks of the marketplace, but saying every single investment I make, I want to make sure that the businesses are responsible, that they're treating their employees well, that they're minimizing their impact on the environment. So that's the real risk management. Has a business identified its risks? Is it managing those risks? Is it doing its utmost to minimize its harm on the world? Then there's the benefiting stakeholders. So what does the business do to benefit stakeholders? Now, some people think that mining companies are intrinsically evil, but actually, if you think about Anglo American as a great example of a company that made its antiretroviral drugs free for all of its employees, it fundamentally changed the way that mining companies treated their employees with HIV/AIDS and made a real positive difference. It's created economic pockets of excellence within its mining communities and really try to make that at heart of their business. But this is about doing business well and doing business good. And then the final side is the contributing to solutions bit. So can we find investments that have contributing to environmental and social solutions at the heart of what they do? So if you think about that spectrum, there is no reason to say you don't incorporate that wider spectrum into your investment philosophies. If you want pure impact, there is an argument that well-managed companies with an intentional desire to deliver environmental and social good will also be the winners of the future. So I flip it around and think about the problems. There are effectively three big problems we're facing. Climate change, very obvious, some of the real strategic challenges. Growing inequalities, more and more people are disenfranchised, and COVID has been, key in highlighting that. So access to education, access to technology, access to health services, water, all of these things are major problems. And the third is that this unsustainable production and consumption. We're living in a world that is consuming at a rate that is unsustainable. So if you think about business and being innovative and creating solutions to each of these three buckets of problems, they should be in a very, very good place to make us money as well as deliver environmental and social solutions. So I would challenge pension fund trustees to think differently about impact investing, sustainable investment, responsible investment. Think about the risk mitigation, which will protect your underlying investments, but also about innovation and potential channeling of capital in a way that can generate a good financial outcome alongside an environmental and social one.
I mean, Richard, building on that, I mean, and tying it to the Building Back Better theme of our event, I mean, what do you think the public should be asking of the businesses that it invests its money in, and of the managers of that money? What should we now be asking businesses to do in response to the pandemic?
Well, I mean, there are two levels here. One is those people who want to get really involved. And, in my work as a UN advocate, we are always talking to businesses. In fact, business has leapt on the sustainable development goals in some ways more than politicians, and many companies now see the way that both the people who work for them and the people who buy their products genuinely really care about this. And indeed, if you care about the welfare of the company, I remember Mark Carney saying to me that the biggest risk that he could see with companies nowadays is in fact scandal, is them people finding out that they're doing the wrong things, that they're not telling the truth, that they're employing sweatshops and everything like that. So if you want to get granular, then you should, as a consumer, support businesses that are doing the right thing. And as a shareholder, as a stakeholder, again, support all those businesses. But for the normal person, they don't necessarily have the time or the knowledge or the skill set to do that. So what's the one big thing that a normal person can do? They can just ask that they are reassured by their pension that their money is being spent to support what the experts, the pension people, think are the most sustainable and ethical companies. And this should be an opportunity, by the way. I mean, I got sent some statistics today saying that, I think 51% of people want say that they want their pensions to be ethical. And I think it's 70% of young people. And indeed, 45% of people say that if they knew that they were ethical and sustainable, they'd put more money into their pension. So what I'm looking is in many ways, for the pension companies to do this work for us, to see it as a huge economic opportunity, as a differential, as something where they would be selling that. And the problem is they're so sort of, at the moment, secretive about it. What we're really asking is for the pension companies to be partners in this. Now that, we're so regularly reassured that the why not moment has arrived. I remember someone from BlackRock saying that to me, that as it were, you're not taking a cut. comic relief when they were found to have unethical investments, changed to ethical investment, made more money. So now that we can be assured of that, you're looking for a public partnership. Actually, I'm trying to get the public to really ask lots of questions of the pension companies, but I'm looking forward to when the pension companies say, come to us. We're the ones who are doing it best. There's a great company called My Future Super in Australia who are enormously successful because of the fact that they're talking about it. And then you'll get transparency, and you'll get companies that thrive because they're getting more investment, and you'll get huge behavior changes, and you'll get more scandals about the people who haven't changed their behavior. And you'll get people who say they're committed to the SDGs, but only at a surface level, suddenly investigating at every level of their work how they can do it, be it the gender pay gap or their supply chains, or their use of plastic. So I think it's an exciting opportunity for everyone, and shouldn't be a nervous one. Should be one where we're all charging together in the same direction.
Yes, and I think that opportunity as well is something that's very important. I mean, this is an opportunity for money managers as well as for the public, isn't it? And I think the research that you were referring to is possibly the Department for International Development research into investing in a better world, which is a very good piece of research, and we'll put that in our follow-up email to the audience so that they can see that as well. I mean, Amanda, when you in your internal discussions and with other asset managers, I mean, how do you really make the case for why asset managers should be contributing to building back a more resilient society and more resilient economies after this crisis?
20 years ago was a lot harder than it is today. I think A, because people are raising these issues with their fund managers, and B, I'm very fortunate to work with a CEO who fundamentally believes that we have a duty of care to our underlying customers to make sure they can retire. And his view is, if a company is poorly governed and doing something wrong, that's not actually in line with that. So investing for a better future for all of us is at the heart of the purpose of our business. So for me, I'm hugely fortunate that I've got senior people to buy into this, but that hasn't always been the case. And so what I've had to do over the 20 years is try and demonstrate the financial materiality of what we look at. When big issues blow up, awful as they are, have been really helpful in providing me with ammunition and against the argument, with the arguments that I've had with fund managers. And I can tell you that I have had quite a few in my career, but it is much easier now. A, because we're getting the right questions from our clients. We have a lot of direct end investors as well. So that dialogue that we have is really, really valuable. But not many fund managers actually have that end consumer, that direct retail side of their business. So it's really important for them to listen to the ultimate owners of the stocks. But it's the financial materiality, because A, we want to minimize risk. And B, we want sustainability, and you need to invest for the long term. COVID has been very interesting because there's been a lot of press scrutiny on what they call ESG funds. Now, what I would say is somebody's definition of an ESG fund is quite different. Is it just a tobacco exclusion, or is it really strong in terms of its sustainability credentials? But those funds that are considering environmental social governance factors as part of what they're trying to do to deliver to their end investor have minimized the downfall when COVID hit. And they've been able to sort of buffer themselves. So there is a real resilience piece here, making sure our investments are resilient for the future and for the long term.
Do you think this will be a sustained change as a result of the pandemic, and a sustained change and speeding up of asset managers' embrace of impact investment?
Yes, I wouldn't say COVID is entirely standalone responsible for this big focus at the moment. We've seen, in 20 years, I can think of the Enron crisis, the Shell Brent Spar issue, the BP Macondo spill, you know, numerous blow-ups, the banking crisis, and then, you know, sort of, and now this growth in a new generation realizing that you can make money and make a difference. So I think all of this is adding to this sustained future for our investment industry. And finally, people have woken up that there's money to be made in sustainable investment. That's not necessarily always a good thing, because it sometimes makes people do things that, you know, Richard talked about, making sure that you probe your investments, understand what the policies are, that it's not just a nice rubber stamp, a shiny, glitzy marketing thing. So that's going to be really important. But I think that the world has moved very quickly, particularly in the last 5 years. And I think the Impact Investing Institute is a testament to that the work that's been done by the government and Elizabeth Corley in terms of driving impact investment in the mainstream has been a real game changer in the UK.
Yeah, also, I don't think you can put this knowledge back in the box.
No.
That's the thing. Once people start to realize that actually they have a choice what to do with their money, they're always going to ask that question. They're always going to be saying, well, is this ethical? Is this? They'll also ask, what are the returns like? Where can I make the most money? But they are going to want to know. And the moment that trustees, you know, the sort of evaluation systems will become better and shouldn't be allowed to slow us down. Governments will start to see, the current government is really supportive on these issues, you know, and will start to say to trustees, your fiduciary duty is to the planet and to sustainability and all these things as well. You can't then say, well, no, actually, we've changed our mind. We think we should put all our money back into tobacco and we shouldn't worry about climate and all those issues. I think that it's an ever-opening door. I don't think it can be, I think it's bolted. And what we're trying to do is create as much sort of energy amongst normal people to say there's an opportunity. And particularly, by the way, I think people are going to be asking it of the companies they work for. So as it were, it's not only a poor solo person having to get in touch with an accountant to say, where's my pension and do I lose money by shifting it? I think it'll be an absolutely traditional question of people to ask for every company that they work for. Can you imagine anyone at Oxfam asking Oxfam, have you considered whether your investment is ethical? And they say no, and being happy with that answer? I mean, sorry, I'm not saying Oxfam aren't incredibly ethical, but what I'm saying is the Church of England can't ask that question. The BBC can't be asked that question and just say no and let it lie. I think now that it's in the open, it's going to move, and it's going to move fast in the right direction. And then, of course, the companies that are being supported have more money, can do more, will expand more, become more successful companies, and therefore invite more investment.
Yes, yes. It's always a question how fast policy and regulation follows the public mood, though, isn't it? It's often a bit of a laggard. I mean, if I want to leave plenty of time for the audience to ask questions, and I see they're already coming in. I mean, building on that, on your sense, Richard, that this can't be none of this can be put back in the box really now. What would your three recommendations for action to the audience be that they can take away today to really manage their money better in line with their values and contribute to building back better?
Well, look, I think that, you know, as we're not on this issue, I think we all have to look into our general behaviors, you know, and that just means closed food, travel, all those issues. You know, a lot of us have learned during the COVID crisis we can do with less than we thought we can, and we're more reliant on our local communities than we thought we were. But I think that, you know, everyone should ask where their pension is, and if they get an answer from either their company or from their accountant, which they're not happy with, then push them. They're the money experts. Say, well, I need the answer. And I have to say, the first time I asked my accountant about it, he said, I don't know. He said, oh, I haven't looked into this. And it took a while to actually get the answers. And that will soon rectify itself. They'll soon have favorite people who they can go to if you want that. So I would say just ask a lot of questions. And then once you've asked the question, make the change. And I suppose for, you know, people who are interested in this, really believe and have examples of the kind of things the kind of money that can be made and the kind of companies that have, you know, that can take investment. I remember when I started thinking about this, I just assumed all impact investment was sort of cocoa farmers in Uganda. I thought that's probably it. And when I found out that it was, you know, wind farms in the UK, affordable healthcare in the UK, sustainable foods in the UK, all these things, you know, so have good examples. I think just ask questions and act on it and talk to people about it, like we're doing now.
Absolutely. And within people's organisations, within their employers, I mean, people who don't have an accountant, but who are a member of an employer pension scheme, what should they do?
It's a simple thing to ask with a complicated answer. You know, it's to ask the question whether or not they believe that your pension is somewhere ethical and sustainable, and if not, why not? And then to ask it again and ask it again. And it is, you know, there suddenly you really do come across this issue of the fact that people want to believe in the company that they are working for. And if they find out that that company is not interested in this issue and not dealing with those things, they'll go and work for a company that is. I remember Paul Polman once saying to me that they put 2 ads in for the same job at Unilever, and one of them stressed pay and perks, and the other one stressed Unilever's record on sustainability. And they got many more responses from the one where they were stressing the moral value of the company and the progress they were making than the ones that were about the perks.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's an opportunity for employers as well. Amanda, what would your 3 actions that you would recommend to the audience be?
So the first would be use your voice, you know, supporting what Richard's just said about asking, you know, pension funds. You have a voice and you have a set of values. And if you want your money to be aligned with your values, use your voice. The second is to not just challenge your pension funds. Many people have pension funds, but a lot of people also have financial advisors. The financial advisor market is sometimes a real barrier to entry in terms of understanding the variety of different products out there. So the type of investment you want, ask your financial advisor, you know, about what options you have. And if he says they are limited, that is not the right answer. So keep challenging him. And if that financial advisor can't help you, find one that can. And then the third is really understand what the issues are, because they are not black and white. One person's ethics is not another. One person's impact is not another. So really be broad-minded and understand that all businesses have the ability to have a positive impact. And then you need to dial up what's acceptable for yourself. So, you know, really kind of get to grips with the issue. I think palm oil is a great example of how palm oil plantations are devastating rainforests. But actually, if we switch to another type of oil, could be even far worse for the world. So it's about sustainable palm oil. It's about making sure that the products that you are buying are meeting your values. So look out for the issues, understand the issues, challenge your advisor, and realize you have a voice.
And it's banks next. I've just moved a lot of my money into Triodos Bank, which has been an ethical bank for absolutely years and years. So I think this whole issue of, as I say, financial footprint, what is my money doing, is just something to always have your eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, we've got some excellent questions from the audience, and I'm going to actually turn to the one that's the most upvoted, because it's very relevant to the point, Amanda, that you were just making on, you know, one person's ethics and not another person's ethics. It's a question from someone who hasn't given their name, but says, what do we do when the E, S and G criteria don't align? How do we want our pension fund managers to evaluate, for example, an oil production company which is providing excellent healthcare for its employees and local communities where it operates?
I think that's a great question, and it highlights the complexities of the issues that I said, and it's so really understanding what your values are. Now, for some people, they just don't want to be invested in an oil company because, you know, they think all oil companies are evil. what I would say is, if that's what you want, there are plenty of funds out there that will do that. However, you also have to recognize that these issues are complex. Oil and gas companies are massive employees, so there's all these people who are employed by them. If they went out of business, what do we do to make sure that those people have jobs? There is a just transition that we need to be working for. So using your voice as an investor to challenge companies about scenario analysis, whether they've got a business in 10, 15, 20 years time, as we move to a more greener environment. What are they doing to invest in renewables? What are they doing to transition their business away from the higher carbon intensive issues into energy that is going to be sustainable and cleaner for the environment? Some oil and gas companies are some of the biggest investors in renewables. So as I said, you've got to understand your issues. And coming back to Richard's point about making sure that it's not just a black and white, oh, well, we don't do this and we do that. Fund managers that can demonstrate their understanding of the complexities of the issues, will be better placed. But it's about risk mitigation. If you're a long-term investor and you invest in a very dirty oil and gas company, you are likely to end up being financially harmed, compared with an investor challenging companies, making sure they're the most responsible, investing in renewables and have a sustained business for the future. So, as I said, people's ethics and values are very different. Some people are, I just want to be meat free because of climate change. Other people are much more about sustainable agriculture. So the issues are complex, and you really need to challenge your fund manager to make sure that they understand the complexities and that they're actually delivering what you want from your pensions.
Richard, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, look, I completely appreciate the complexity of the proposition. I think what is exciting about the moment is that businesses themselves are starting to ask themselves all these questions. I've seen many businesses who have literally put everything they do next to all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals and started to check those things across. And I would say that actually being consistent with Sustainable Development Goals is a pretty good way of finding out how you should behave as a company. So, and I think that, these evaluation systems will start to emerge more and more. And I think what was happening when I started talking to people 2 years ago is few people were saying, let's wait for the system to sort itself out. It's also terribly complicated, there'll be a winner eventually. And I think the idea is just to keep the pressure on all of us, and those evaluation systems, will develop fast, and people will create different products that are for more specific kinds of, attitude towards your investment.
We've got a very good question from Lydia Marsden about whether pension funds in this very uncertain situation should be localizing their investments to directly benefit the communities they serve. And I mean, this is something we're thinking a lot about at the Institute, because obviously some of the local government pension schemes, for example, have a very strong focus already on community. And Lydia is asking, should UK local authority pension funds invest in the cities their beneficiaries reside in? And does this require, should there be a more radical rethinking of their fiduciary duty?
Wow, I mean, by the way, that's a whole new area to me. And I think that sounds very exciting and interesting, as it were. I used to think it was all abroad. Now I see it's at home. That's exactly the kind of thing which would make things more appealing to investors. One of the things which, when we get people who've got a chunky amount of money to Comic Relief and want to give it to Comic Relief, it's quite interesting how one of the first things they say is, could it be spent in Suffolk, or could it be spent in Sheffield? I mean, I think that's a really exciting possibility, the thought of really focusing your pension on the very area and the very people that you're involved with. But Amanda probably knows the extent to which it's possible.
I do hope as well that heightened sense of the incredible importance of our communities that has been brought by this pandemic. It certainly feels to me like one of the last potentially lasting changes
Yeah.
from the current situation. Amanda, your thoughts on whether a radical rethink of fiduciary duty is necessary?
I think we need to ask the government that one, don't we? So, I mean, I think this is one of the challenges. So we need a government that provides a really clear framework for pension fund trustees in the space. They are investing people's money for the long term. And historically, there's been a view that if you invest ethically, you lose money. I think people have kind of got over that. But pension fund trustees perhaps still are very conservative. What would be great to see is something like a 90-10 model that operates in France, where 10% of the pension fund actually needs to be dedicated to impact investments, dedicated to local or global impact outcomes. And what I would say to particularly local authority pension funds, if they think of the charity space, charities need to say, well, what is my aim and objective as a charity, and how do I align my investments alongside my aims and objectives so that it's actually doing what the charity wants. Our investments are mirrored. Local authorities have the same, in my view, have the same moral question that they need to ask. If they're investing on behalf of their local constituents, surely there needs to be something that gives back. But we do need to have clearer guidance from the government on this, and we need to have less of an ability for trustees just to fall back and, oh, I can't do this, it's too difficult. So I think this is where the power of the people comes in. Ask the questions. You know, I have had pension fund trustees in the past say to me, I can't do this, it's all a fiduciary duty, we need to maximize our returns, so we need to keep our investments as broad as possible. And no one's ever asked me about this. So here's your chance. Ask the pension fund. That's the fallback options. We don't get asked about it. So therefore it's not important to the end investor. I try and flip it on the head and say to the pension fund trustees, have you asked your end investors what they want? And some pension funds are starting to do that. But ultimately, you can't invest along values if you don't know what those values and those beliefs are for your end beneficiaries. So use your voice. And if the pension fund trustees on this call, I would encourage them to think about asking what their beneficiaries want.
I mean, that question, if you asked people who have a local pension fund whether or not they would like some of it to be invested in their local communities, I think you'd get a very, very high figure in the 90s there. I mean, I just can't say people will know I don't give a damn, because so that really is an interesting idea.
And these kind of dialogues are also, a benefit to the pension scheme trustees themselves as an engagement tool with their members, which is something they often complain about, is that they don't get the engagement from the members that they would like. And these issues are certainly ones around, which people have such strong feelings, and doubtless even stronger in the light of the current circumstances. We've got another very topical question from Sarah Farrell, who says, in light of the increased spotlight on the Black Lives Matter movement as a result of events in the US, does the panel think that racial justice will be an increasingly important ESG consideration, for example, investing in BAME-led companies? There was something I was thinking about earlier today, where there's been a lot of reaction to companies in the US showing their social media support for the protests in a quite unusual way, but being challenged in return by various people saying, okay, would you like to show me a picture of your executive committee and your board, where obviously we know that BAME communities are very underrepresented at senior corporate levels, both in the US and in the UK. Who wants to start on that?
Well, I think it's another one of these, it is a big issue, obviously, and as is the gender issue, as is the climate issue. And I think that we will all be asking ourselves those questions much more. In the entertainment industry, there's been a huge amount of noise about this over the years. We still haven't got to where we want to be. We've had to take actual sort of positive action. And I think that I would hope that would be, You know, one of the questions that you ask companies, and again, one of the treasures that you can invest in, actually, to say, and this is a company that we think is brilliant on this, and this is a company that's having a massive effect on that. It's not only a ticking off, it's actually an opportunity to support companies that are doing the most and that are the most representative of our wider community, and to give as much opportunity as we can to solve those problems. So it's not only a critical, it's actually a positive way of supporting the things that we believe in.
Yes, I mean, something that I wrote about a lot when I was a journalist at the FT in my former life. And I mean, it's part of the G, isn't it, Amanda? It's part of good governance means a genuinely diverse leadership committee and board. So is that one of the ways that this issue needs to get more closely integrated into investment decisions?
Yeah, it is the issue. So yes, whilst this at the moment is very much a racial issue, if you come back to what I was talking about right at the beginning, which is this rise in inequality, there are many disenfranchised communities, be it through race, be it through religion, be it through gender, be it through disabilities. So one of the things that we really need to target companies on is diversity. I used to be very much an advocate of, well, if we set principles and we get companies to move, then they will move. I've now got old and grumpy, and I've kind of just get to the point where we just need to regulate. So I'll take gender as an example. In the UK, every single company has 9 years to refresh its board, because non-executive directors stay on a board for 9 years and generally step up. So we started out in 2011 pushing for at least 1/3 of all boards to be female. Now we've gone that 9 years. We're now into 10 years of pushing for 1/3 of representation, and we've only just creeping over the line. And the excuses that you can't have any, you've had 9 years to refresh your board. Surely by this point you should be aiming for parity. You should be aiming for better diversity. This is gender, this is mental capacities. So things like different skill sets. People with IT skill sets, people with a younger view on the world. Ultimately, boards are representing the end customer, so that they should be thinking about all the different things that the end customer wants and making sure that that is represented on the board. So I'm an absolute advocate that we need to have better governance around pushing for better diversity on boards. And sadly, I've now got old and grumpy, and I used to be, let's encourage companies to do it naturally. I just feel we get to the point where we need to start regulating on these issues, because I think excuses are just no longer justifiable.
Can I turn to another question, which I think is very relevant, from Anthony Charlwood, who says, pension funds are increasingly using passive index tracking funds to invest in equities, partly on cost grounds and partly due to the difficulty of finding active managers who can outperform. And he's saying sustainable, impactful investing seems to require active management. So how do we reverse the trend? Does the trend need to be reversed? And if so, how do we reverse it to enable sustainable investing? Shall I go
That's
to
definitely Amanda? One for Amanda.
I was going to say, should we go to Amanda?
I think it's a very good question. The one thing you can't do as a passive investor is say your governance is rubbish, so I'm just going to sell out, or you've done this wrong, so I'm just going to sell out. So there is a real challenge. That said, there is some innovation happening in the passive space that is allowing, so it's sort of active quants, if you like. So it's allowing more passive investors to tilt the types of passive mandates that they have away from carbon, for instance. So what you do is you tilt the portfolio. So there are some interesting innovation coming in. I think the pure passive space, you cannot do ESG integration. You cannot, even through engagement and voting, you still don't have that ultimate card, that card that you want, which is, I'm just going to sell out of this. So, and particularly with impact investing, where you are seeking specific investments with specific outcomes, there is no passive in that space. The more people who ask the questions and the more people who want the products that are delivering impact, that's how you will end up reversing the trend, because passive has become the kind of default option. But actually, if you use your voice properly, we can get pension fund trustees to think about this. There is a balance between building a pension fund that will deliver returns and also actively pushing your money into something positive.
There are lots more really interesting questions, and we're not going to get to them all. We will be putting the questions to the panelists after the event has ended, and we'll follow up in an email to you all in the audience. But I think I'd like to end with the last question, which is so relevant to the work that Richard, that you're trying to do with Make My Money Matter, and so important. And it says, it's from Robert Van Maren, and he says, some people might think they don't have sufficient financial literacy and therefore don't have the confidence to ask questions of their pension managers. Where should the average person on the street go to learn more about how pensions work, and can they have a significant financial impact outside of their pensions? And my first answer to that would be that we are going to put a list of resources and, for example, our website in the follow-up email, and there are some really good sources of that information. But I mean, Richard, this is one of the big things that you're thinking about with Make My Money Matter, isn't it?
It really is. We're going to try and make My Money Matter as accessible and understandable as we possibly can. Yesterday, I was looking at little things that we're doing digitally, just 30-second ads, and trying to decide if we could clear the song. Do you remember that song from Madagascar, I've Got to Move It, because I was suggesting that people should move their pension as fast as they can. So, I mean, we are going to try and make it something that people at least believe that they can ask the question, don't have to be too well informed. And you do find that, particularly amongst young people, they make things simple and understandable for themselves. I noticed this with all the work that my daughter does. They find the most exciting facts. They communicate those facts in quick ways. So I hope that there will be a kind of really easy, and that we will help with good communication about what the issues are. And then, as I say, I think there's a real financial opportunity for pensions to make it simple too, and just ask really simple questions and present really simple products, which they think will mean that people can, without becoming financial experts, know that they're doing the right thing. That's why I love even the name of my Future Super in Australia, because it just sounds fun. You trust it, you see their ads, you think that it's the right thing to do. So I think that, what we're hoping to do, as it were, by opening the windows on all this issue, is to, as it were, create commerciality and simplicity. But for anyone who is worried about it, I hope that certainly our website and a lot of the other places that you're going to recommend, I hope they at least have whatever that thing is, a prologue, which makes it nice and simple at the beginning before you get into the charts and statistics.
Yes, what we used to call at the FT the bollocks par. Amanda, what do you want to come in on that?
Finance frightens people. And so what Richard's doing is just amazing. And I've been really, really supportive of the Make My Money Matter campaign. I said that, one of the biggest challenges is making it easy for people to switch, and it's not easy for people to switch. So giving people as the best sort of tools possible out there is helpful. But there are organizations that are helpful. So advisors, there are advisors that focus on ethical solutions. There are also organizations like Share Action that have been set up specifically to target pension funds that try and provide easy consumer education materials. UCSIV, the UK Sustainable Investment and Finance Association, also has a sort of retail wholesale arm. So look out for these guides, look out for these websites. There are helpful guides out there, but under no illusion, it is complex and it does frighten people. And this has been one of the biggest challenges and hurdles that we have, is in a very highly regulated pension environment, making sure that people also have a choice. And this is where we as an industry need to make sure that we work with the government to try and get the government to provide easier accessible information for the end investor.
Thank you, Amanda. And just to repeat that we will send links to all the resources that have been mentioned to you all in the audience. And I'm aware that we're now at 5 o'clock, so we do need to wrap up, which is a shame, because I could go on talking to Richard and Amanda for hours longer. We do know this is such a difficult and challenging time, and many of you in the audience will be facing really difficult challenges, but that we do believe that despite the dreadful costs, this crisis does provide some opportunities to build back a better and more humane society. And we will be doing everything we can to achieve that aim and to support Make My Money Matter and the efforts of individuals like Amanda and the organisation she works for to get this more higher up the agenda. And it just remains for me to say a big thank you to Richard and a big thank you to Amanda, and to you, our audience, for joining. Thank you very much.